Right. Welcome back for another episode. It is officially the second birthday of ADHD Her Way. This past month was actually our second anniversary. And since we first aired the podcast, I am so thrilled that 2 years down, I'm still going strong. Maybe not posting as frequently as I was once upon a time. Let's be honest, twice weekly was probably a little unrealistic. However, I have decided to drop you a second episode later in the week. I'm so incredibly proud of the fact that I'm still here and I've been able to share for the past 2 years so many episodes with you. I think there's over 60, almost 70 episodes. And this is obviously, this being the 70th, I think. And it is something that I take great pride in. I've been on my own journey over the last couple of years with my own neurodivergence. And probably since doing the podcast, I've shared that before, have come to terms with my own likely autism part of the presentation as well, not just ADHD. And so really it should be called AuDHD Her Way. Have tossed and turned about it. But to be honest, I think we can still capture this even 2 years down, just fine underneath that banner. And yeah, but it's been a huge privilege to share my understanding and being able to share my bit of my wisdom about working in a profession, but also being a lived experience ADHD or ADHD female and being able to therefore share quite vulnerably about my own experiences and that of others, and yeah, platforming those who are very prominent in the space. So yeah, thank you so much for being here and supporting this podcast. I have a little giveaway for those of you who are listening and would like to participate. It will take place on social media if you are listening, and this is happening over the coming week of the first week of March. I will be selecting a few winners to gain some nice prizes. I'm going to put together some packs for you as well that contain my favorite resources for those of you as well who are long-time listeners. And so, yeah, please enter. All the details are below for you to, yeah, see. And there's a few steps involved, but I look forward to reading all the awesome entries. All right. So now let's get into it. I thought today we would spend a little bit more about, yeah, AuDHD, if I didn't give you a hint about it, because it has come up a few times in the podcast, but I don't think that we have unpacked it enough for those who are still wondering exactly what autism and ADHD combined can look like, or being an ADHDer, and specifically that in females. Now, again, I just want to preface that this is not diagnostic. This is not meant to be an episode that's going to draw out everyone's experience, but this might shine some light on the important ways that ADHD can show up for females, basically. Now, I have covered already much earlier on an episode on how ADHD shows up in women and girls. So this one is really how ADHD can show up in women and girls as a little bit of a follow-up. Now, same goes with ADHD, is that it is a neurodevelopmental condition to be basically born with both ADHD and autism from the start. It actually was thought that ADHD and autism couldn't present together until about 10 years ago, which is just crazy. So it was only in just over 10 years ago that the diagnostic manual, DSM-5, recognized that both conditions, both disabilities, could coexist. And what that's meant is that so many people went undiagnosed for so many years, or misdiagnosed or underdiagnosed in terms of both disabilities being present for them. And it also didn't reflect things properly in the research. From what you will see is that for the past few decades is that the research was done on only ADHD or only autism. So the research only reflected one or the other. And that obviously has a massive impact. So I dare say there's been an underrepresentation of possibly both disabilities for quite some time, especially in female populations and other minority populations, and especially those who are presenting as ADHD, being that we know that there's a few reasons why people may go diagnosed not too much later in their life or completely undiagnosed, is that there is a tendency for autism and ADHD to overshadow each other. And what that means is that traits cancel each other out. Also, there is this overcompensation happening as for those who are actively masking or internalizing their traits. There's this overcompensation. And it gives a bit of a confusing picture too, because it can mean that a person can look quite organized whilst also really chaotic and disorganized behind the scenes in the normative way. And it also means that the intervention or treatment has not been very easy as well, especially for ADHD women. And that can look so many different ways, which I'll go into in a moment. So I find that actually ADHD comes with quite a number of contradictions. And that, again, makes it quite hard to spot, but could also really exacerbate the experience for an ADHD individual. Can make it really hard. So I'll break it down to 5, and I may sort of follow up for more because there is obviously a breadth of experiences, and I've narrowed it down to only a few here for the sake of this episode. But I may have to follow up with a few others because there is actually so many contradictions, and I love that the internet has really represented that a bit more, and I find it quite. And I'm basing this on the experience of probably the ADHD girls and women having this tendency to find the following 5 things pretty common. So it can look like the ADHD really needing lots of stimulation and excitement and novelty, but the the autistic individual really wanting predictability. Again, there might be this tendency for an ADHD to really wanting lots of different new ideas, lots of novelty. Meanwhile, the autistic individual maybe gets overstimulated, and that dopamine seeking can be really contradictory. Oh, and here is my beautiful little doggo. This is Sunny, by the way, everyone. Sunny is now 3 months old, almost 4, and he's been my little companion. I don't think I've shared him on the podcast before, but he's been an absolute beautiful light of my life. And yeah, I've enjoyed having a new doggo by my side. Yeah, really glad he's joined us. So that's one aspect. The other one is loving social plants, but also really getting social hangovers. And that can be for various reasons. We do know that RSD is present for both ADHDs and autistic individuals. Typically, ADHDs are known to be really quite outgoing and extroverted. Autistic presenting may be seen as somewhat more reserved or pulled back. It is something that it may not look normative to the outside person, but we may have differences in how we communicate and how we do social gatherings and whatnot. It's really common for ADHD women and girls to have really high masking and really high internalization of their ADHD autistic traits, meaning that we probably come across as quite socially adaptive and as those really internalizing and going with the flow type of people, and maybe quite good at conversation because we've learned to basically copy it from movies, from people, by people watching. Lots of us like psychology, love like understanding how people operate, how people work. And so we've basically learned how to pretend like we're really good at this stuff. And I've always thought of myself as a really outgoing person, really quite excitable and quite impulsive in conversation. But then probably autistic part of me was probably one to kind of want to internalize, so mask quite heavily, be that people pleasing individual to and rule following. And so it was a quite contradictory experience for me to be really out there and wanting to have lots of social engagements, but also really overthinking everything. So I had the impulsivity, but I also was really paralyzed by what to contribute, what to say, or would I be rejected, and really wanting to fit in, really adapting to the environment and to other people, and to maybe have that likelihood of really oversharing and then being hugely embarrassed or fearful about how much you overshared and just really going one way or the other way completely, so that they don't have over control and be under control, or impulsiveness that may have been happening for you. So again, it can be both those extremes, perhaps, for those of you listening, and that can be a reality for lots of girls as well growing up, and therefore make it quite hard. But for some, it's really subtle, and that again can make it a bit tricky and maybe seemingly quite adaptive and like they're not struggling, but internally, what that may cost is just a really increased dysregulation. And because there's a lot that internalize and it's not really observed on the outside. And also, it can lead to fears of not deep enough connections and more surface level friendships because there's this fear of being too vulnerable and then being blamed of oversharing and things like that. So there can be this putting a wall up to out of fear of being rejected. And so it can look like many friends, but maybe lots of surface-based friends as well. It's a nervous system that gets activated whenever we're around people. Now, the third one is loving surprises versus needing that predictability. And same goes with plans and needing lots of control around that. So it's that wanting people to plan things for you, wanting there to be surprises, your partner, a family member, but then also wanting to control how you're then going to be reacting, like fearing that you may not react as expected. That's a big one. I find that comes up a lot for my ADHD women. And basically, therefore, not really enjoying birthdays or Christmases because there's always been this element of feeling guilty of not appreciating the thing that they got. But your own thoughtfulness about presence and that, or fearing that, again, you didn't think about them enough. You didn't get the right things for others. Gift giving is just something that's really complicated and may not be actually one of your love languages because of this. And so that can be really complex and result in a lot of, discomfort in relationships because maybe your partner is actually quite keen on gift giving, but there is this long-standing trauma basically around it, both about people not being there on your birthdays or getting you the wrong gifts, not thoughtful enough gifts, not based on your special interests. And then there's also this element of, them not maybe being thoughtful enough around surprising you or that being exciting enough and in not feeling like much energy went into those. So there's so many reasons why gift giving is a little bit complicated, but also still something you may thrive on at the same time, and that being really quite cruel. So that's another one, is that structure can feel really unsafe, or not knowing how your face needs to be when you get a gift and what energy you put into someone else's gift and overthinking that whole process as well. The fourth one is all about disorganization and also perfection. So there is this element of, for myself, very much so, I was told as a little girl that I was quite messy in my working out. I would rush things quite frequently, but also at the same time, I was quite perfect about my grades. And I would often try really quite hard in my subjects, especially those that I liked. But I was still quite disorganized in my bag. If my room was really untidy. But then there was other times where I would have a space for everything, or we call it organized chaos, basically. And there's this element of, say, with assignments, like having just real chaos in the way you approach it, doing things in a really muddled way, whilst also really wanting to perfect it. So you may still hand it in last minute, but you would be working on it incredibly hard for that last one and be really frustrated with yourself if you don't still get more than a pass. And so there is this element of having both extremes that can be really dysregulating and, supposedly not really caring, but then underlying that really caring at the same time about things quite incredibly, being achievement and also things to look a certain way, whether it's your presentation of yourself or it is of your belongings. And so this is really conflicting element of what you put out there and not wanting to look disorganized, feeling really distressed by that, but also finding yourself not being able to basically hit those unrealistic standards that you've set for yourself or that you feel society's kind of put upon you. So there is this internal battle and external as well with that. And I feel that so heavily myself. So it can look so many different ways. It can show up in everything that you do. So this disorganization can show up in your scheduling, in the way you have your house or your bedroom as a young girl. It's in the way that you have your school bag or your adult bag, your car, your other belongings, and they do say with your car as a representation of your mind. Well, that is honestly true for me. So yeah, again, this can go in both extremes. You can experience much more of that sense of perfectionism or real overcompensation to keep things tidy and in a certain way, or really pull things back to basically manage this otherwise disorganization or felt out of control. So there can be people perhaps have found really, really helpful systems that basically, if they didn't have these calendars, these certain systems, that they would fear everything would fall apart. And that can be hugely distressing. So approaching this with flexibility is really key. And so this fifth one is just to lead on from the last around wanting this control over your planning and scheduling and really enjoying new events and scheduling those, but only if they are for other people or as events like parties and holidays, and then go over and above and hyperfixated on the events. But then there's other element of paralysis and perfectionism that comes in when it comes to the autism. And there's this real, especially about travel, I find it's just I want to be chill and I want to be relaxed and approach it really open-minded, but I also really want to know exactly what's coming up and what we are doing in our itinerary to the nth degree. So there's this really confusing element of needing everything planned out to the T, whilst also really wanting to lean into this. Well, let's just see what happens. Let's lead into this risky, novel, open-minded, whatever happens, kind of fun energy. And so this again can make planning really hard over holiday. So I probably find I do a bit of both, where I have certain plans in my mind, or that I really over plan and I really look at certain accommodations, probably for comfort as well. But it can mean that you could get disappointed if they don't hit the same standard as what you had basically built up in your head. And therefore, yeah, it can be risky to really plan things out. However, the alternate being that if you weren't to plan anything, it could mean, say, with living location. And, there's people who, and I've been guilty of that, we'll see what happens. When my rental lease runs out, I'll just see what happens. And the other part of me is holy moly, this is so scary. When we're going to live, we must find the perfect location, the perfect space, the same kind of rent payment, because what if I can't? And so it's this real contradiction about wanting to have everything planned out for the future, but also for events, but also really wanting to approach it super relaxed and otherwise feeling paralyzed by all the planning that needs to happen. And decision making is really overwhelming. So that can make things hard. And yeah, decision making and planning is where I see a lot of contradictory kind of experiences for individuals. And so, yeah, it's going to show up again in so many different ways. It can show up in school, in event planning, buying, location purchasing. But again, none of these examples I've probably given you today would feel completely out of the ordinary. However, listening to them back to back, you might actually go tick, 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 tick. So there's a few important elements that I obviously going to address today that a psychologist or a GP would be looking for. This is really just to give you a start to kind of reflect upon. I have created a resource that I'll also link below, and I'll share about again, that really goes into more depth about what kind of questions to really reflect on if you would like to pass on anything to practitioners to further look into this for you, because it can be a really important part of your experience to share this with someone. And so some of the scenarios today may be applicable there. I did hope to share some that feel really relevant so that it can spark conversation. Again, it's not meant as diagnostic necessarily. However, it might become part of a diagnostic conversation. And it is really important that you feel validated by this. I'm happy to cover more if you'd like about the ways that we can actually manage the AuDHD experience, how we actually can approach things in terms of ways of managing ourselves, support those around us who are AuDHD, autistic and ADHD, because it is a bit of a different approach than your typical executive functioning supports for an ADHD or those specifically focused on for instance, sensory tools for an autistic individual or burnout prevention, there's several other elements that we may need to consider if we're ADHD. I hope this conversation today was really helpful. Yeah, I'm ready for another year. Please feel free to share what more episodes you'd like to see. If you'd like a follow up of this one, please comment on the poll and go to the Instagram, follow us on ADHD Her Way. And I have my personal profile, Johanna_Bardenhorst, where the competition will also take place. So it'll be on those two profiles. So take a peek. And yeah, I look forward to checking in more with you soon. If you want any work resources or to work with me, just a reminder to head to my website because I love working with ADHD women like myself. It is one of my favorite type of person to support, especially in the coaching space, because I just feel that we can really get a lot of traction very quickly with that extra accountability. And yeah, tune in for a new episode next week. Later this week, I have an interview with Marie Cameron where we'll be talking about anxiety, burnout, stress, and that conversation I'm really looking forward to as well. So let me know your thoughts below. I look forward to, doing another year with you. All right. Bye.